really special location today. We're in southern Florida. As you can see, I'm a little more relaxed and at peace than I was in earlier stages of the video. I've fully adopted the Floridian lifestyle, but I've ventured my way down outside of Fort Myers, Florida. And here in this tourist hotspot, where partygoers, beachgoers have their fun in the sun, unbeknownst to all of them, just beneath their feet is the remnants of the mighty kingdom of the Calusa Empire, and one of the most fascinating man-made structures in North America. You're seeing it right behind me. It's Mound Key. It's an entirely man-made island. Over 2,000 years old. This mangrove, I gotta stop because some people are coming by. The Calusa were the head of the mightiest kingdom of the lands we now call the state of Florida. Though many cultures and peoples inhabited the southeast, it was the Calusa who held sway and power over the region, controlling trade routes and exerting a lot of influence on culture and spiritual practice. They had hundreds of cities all over Florida, and all of those cities were high density, with large populations, mounds, temples, houses, middens, and more. Their power was not born from agriculture, but from fishing. They controlled the ports, the richest and most abundant waters for fishing, and traded in seafood. Their diet was about 85% seafood and only 15% foraged plants. Evidence suggests they practiced absolutely no form of agriculture whatsoever. It was their strength in fishing that cemented their power in the area and their longevity as a civilization. They were a stratified society, having what we would identify as kings, a noble class, merchants, laborers, and even slaves. Slaves were used for labor and for human sacrifice. Their culture lasted a long time, rising into prominence and power around the year 800, though their proto-culture beginnings go back much farther. And they survived well into the Spanish conquest, resisting the colonizers and keeping their traditions and practices alive until the last of them were killed off in the year 1750. And I guess we should touch a little bit on the conquistadors in Spanish history, as Florida is where it all started and why we white folks are the ones abundant on the continent today. It all started with an Italian guy named Christopher Columbus, Cristoforo Colombo something or other, I don't remember, was commissioned by Spain to find a western passage to the Indies. He didn't find that passage. He instead, in 1492, landed on an island in what we now call the Bahamas. While there, he terrorized the very peaceful natives living on the islands. He murdered them, he raped many women, he stole their goods, and he took many of them as slaves to bring back home to Spain. All this after establishing the first Spanish colony of the Americas in Haiti. Now, if you're a person who thinks Columbus is a heroic discoverer of America, I've got two things to say to you. One, no one discovered America. Millions of people were living here when he arrived. And two, listen to some of his personal accounts and pride in raping indigenous women. Deification of murderers and rapists is nothing new in the U.S. It started with Columbus, and it's going strong as ever today with our vehement praise for our future dictator, Donald Trump. All hail the Orange One. Over time, there were many expeditions from Spain to the Bahamas and Central and South America. As Mexico, Colombia, and Peru expeditions resulted in a lot of gold being discovered and stolen for the Spanish kingdom, it was thought that the area we call Florida would also contain gold and riches as well. So it was that Ponce de Leon won the official charter to conquer and colonize the area and to take charge of its alleged and legendary city of gold. His first expedition in 1513 was unsuccessful. Thinking that Florida was only a small island to dominate, they found themselves undersupplied and underprepared for such a massive landmass. It was during this first expedition that the Spaniards under Ponce de Leon encountered the Calusa people at Mound Key, the human-made island which was the center of the Calusa Empire. They retreated, forced out by the fierce warriors of the Calusa. 8 years later he returned, with an army, better supplied, and with a stronger force of 500 men, and an intent to establish a permanent Spanish colony in Florida. The Calusa were prepared for the conquistadors and defeated them in battle, forcing them to retreat to Cuba. In Cuba, a wounded Ponce de Leon fell into ill health and died, never to return to Florida. Years later, in 1539, Hernando de Soto decided to try his hand at success where Ponce de Leon and many other expeditions after his failed. He sailed from Cuba to Florida and embarked on what would be a nearly 5-year journey. The first year was spent moving northward through Florida, encountering many peoples, tribes, and cultures, all of whom he and his 700 men either stole from, fought with, or gave smallpox to. Florida was an utter failure for De Soto, and his large company had been cut in size by over a half, dead from either disease or warfare. Plus, the legendary City of Gold was nowhere to be found. Overpowered and desperate, he fled Florida in 1540 and entered what is now called Georgia, burning the Spanish ships to force his conquistadors, who were on the verge of mutiny, into no other choice but to continue serving him and to follow him on his expedition of the continent. Over the next 3 years, he would explore the lands we now know as Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, and Mississippi. He never found gold. He never found success, and he died of disease in Arkansas. Of the original group of 700, only around 200 survived. They returned to Cuba with advice to the Spanish monarchy that they should never again attempt to explore or conquer Florida ever again. The Spanish king ignored them, and he funded many more expeditions. It was here, upon these latter return expeditions to Florida in the late 1550s, that they found no trace of the many cities and civilizations the Jesuit priests of the expeditions of Ponce de Leon and de Soto had described in their journals. Where the conquistadors had failed, disease had succeeded. As much of 90% of the local population had been killed by smallpox. Gone were cities, ceremonial centers, mounds, and what were left were loosely organized and nomadic tribal bands fighting for survival. Even though the indigenous tribes were in a weakened state, the Spanish still could not conquer these people or tame these lands, and officially gave up in the year 1561, the Spanish king announcing they would no longer fund any expeditions into Florida. But unfortunately, other privately funded and not government-sanctioned expeditions led to the successful founding of the first Spanish colony of North America at St. Augustine in 1565. Where a settling group of Spaniards discovered that the land of Florida was now barely habited, the majority of the indigenous dead from disease, and giant swathes of land left uninhabited and ready for development. Disease had finally opened the door to European settlement of North America. The Spanish settlers held power over Florida well into the 1600s, but by then the New World was all the rage, and they had to contend with a regular influx of French, English, and other European settlers. In the next 150 years, we'd see a lot of conflict between the French, Spanish, English, Greek, German, and indigenous, with the balance of power in Florida always shifting, though through all that time it was considered and claimed as a colony of Spain. Until Spain gave up and traded the colony of Florida to Great Britain in exchange for Cuba in 1763. This opened the door for a flood of retirees, vape shops, and biker festivals that now occupy every inch of this hellish landscape we call Florida. The Calusa people brought in millions of pounds of shells and clay and formed the area into an island, complete with a channel running through the middle, ports for docking boats at the ends, and covered it with mounds and earthworks, built to specific astrological alignments, pointing out the rising and the setting of the sun and moon of the solstices. In addition, the island itself was a calendar, as evident by its zigzagging and straight white shell lines that crisscross the entire island in a perplexing yet perfectly aligned pattern. Just think about it, folks. This region, which is supposed to specify a astrological significance, a connection, the human connection that is the bridge between the stars and the earth. That's who we are, and that's what these people expressed, that significance that we carry, a sense of purpose that has long since been lost in ourselves, because what connection does a town like Fort Myers, the vape shop of America, express? It expresses our connection to a bottle of rum and the rim of our portable composting toilet at the back of our boat.
Jet ski on the starboard.
So party on, bitches. Okay, we're queued up at the entrance now, waiting to get in. We got 3 junior archaeologists who came in on canoe before us, and they've taken up the very small boat landing, so we're waiting for them to leave before we can get in. It's pretty precarious to get in, and we should not have rented a boat this size, but we'll deal with it. Hopefully we get the deposit back. This island is a significant part of the Calusa Empire, a stronghold. In the mid-1500s, noted sociopathic murderer Ponce de Leon and his conquistadors were unsuccessful in taking this island from the Calusa. They were successfully warded off, but unfortunately, though they were defeated in battle, they left behind their communicable diseases, which is eventually what led to the collapse of the Calusa Empire. But this was the center of their kingdom. This is where the king lived, on this island. They were a seafaring people. This must have been the major trade port of North America, well, of Southeast North America. And it's evidenced by the fact that there are Poverty Point objects found here. Now think about that, folks. Remember episode 2, Poverty Point, the mysterious pre-Adena, pre-Hopewell mound building civilization that's nearly 5,000 years old, traded with this island, or its objects for some reason were bought here. They are some significance to the people who lived here. Here we are, Mound Key, center of the Calusa Empire. Let's take a look. We're walking on an island completely made of shells and clay. Just look underneath my feet right here. It's all shell, brought here 2,000, 3,000 years ago by prehistoric man. Mud, clay, and shells in prehistoric woven baskets and canoe, methodically layered atop each other to create this giant island. You got to put yourself in their position. You're a hunter-gatherer. Life is very difficult. You have to work constantly to survive. But it's worth that level of energy, that level of effort. They don't have a backhoe, they don't have a bulldozer, they don't have any of that kind of modern equipment we have. They're doing this by hand. Think of the conditions. This is Florida. This is South Florida. It's hot as hell. Swampy. You're sweating. Mosquitoes everywhere, eating you alive. Yet this area was important enough to make it the center of their kingdom, to build it, to craft it, to live here full time. Theme of this place, of this visit, is religious fanaticism. Because you have to be a fanatic to travel across the ocean like the Spaniards did. Wooden boats, long, arduous journey, full of disease and peril and plight. But still, after all of that challenge, and then after that majesty, to find a as of yet unknown continent and unknown people, to still not be moved by that discovery. And once arriving here, to have to be such a fanatic that you want these people whom you've never met, who are obviously living in perfect harmony with their surroundings, to want them to worship your false god. But they couldn't do it. They couldn't convert the Calusa. The Calusa decided to burn their own villages. They decided to lay waste to their own settlements before they would convert to Christianity. They destroyed their villages, they destroyed their homes, and they fled to Cuba. And then, ironically, funnily enough, the fanaticism continued because the Spaniards couldn't convert the Calusa to their religion, so they abandoned the area. But in the early 1900s, an American sect of religious fanatics known as the Koreans occupied the area. I don't have enough time to get into how wacky the Koreans were. Okay, let's do a quick and short dive into the Koreshians. They're so wacky, they're at least worth a short mention. The Koreshians were a hollow earth cult that started in the 1870s under the leadership of a guy named Cyrus Teed, who, interestingly enough, was related to the founder of a different and much more successful religious cult, Joseph Smith, founder of the Church of Mormon. Now, Cyrus was a scientist and a physician, but he was obsessed with electricity and the crackpot philosophical science of alchemy. He did what anyone could do in the U.S. in the mid to late 1800s. He ran an unlicensed and uncertified medical practice where he used what he called eclectic medicine to treat all manner of ailments. In this case, his treatments involved electric shocks. His experiments, in fact, often used extremely large amounts of electricity, and during a particularly dangerous experiment on himself, he received a near-fatal electric shock that caused him to black out. Upon awakening, he exclaimed that while passed out, he had been visited by a divine spirit who presented itself as a floating nude woman who proclaimed herself to be the feminine aspect of the Godhead, who revealed to him the true nature of the universe, told him he was the new Messiah, and that it was his job to go spread the new gospel. Upon awakening, he renamed himself to Koresh. He gave up his job, and he started the Koreshian cult. Now, among the core beliefs of the Koreshians was that the world was hollow, that we are in fact living inside of the planet Earth on a concave surface, not a convex surface, and that at the center of this hollow sphere is a battery-powered sun offering us its illumination and light, and that the stars are just reflections of that sunlight at night. Gravic rays instead of gravity hold us to the Earth. These rays, they come from the sun and they push us down to the ground. And why do we have night? Well, that's because the sun rotates and half of it is black and half of it is light. And to prove all of these theories of hollow Earth, he invented a device called the rectilineator. And surprise, surprise, it successfully proved to him and his cult that we are indeed standing on a concave surface. Despite this proof, when you or I look at the horizon, we don't see the ground curving up, and when we look up, we don't see Japan above our heads. But hey, anyway, he developed a small cult following in Chicago, and after growing to a few hundred members, they decided to relocate to Estero, Florida. Now, at the time, much of southern Florida was considered to be uninhabitable and undesirable due to the heat, the wetland environment that couldn't sustain traditional agriculture or architecture, and the excessive humidity. This was a perfect spot for the Koreshians to buy land for cheap and to be left alone. And the thing was, the Koreshians were master horticulturalists and botanists. They cultivated thousands upon thousands of tropical plants, from ones ranging to plants native to Florida, as well as importing all sorts of species from all over India, Central and South America, Asia, and more, and successfully rearing all of them in verdant and productive orchards. They showed the lands of Florida could be successfully cultivated, and they published many authoritative papers and journals on the subject that were regarded as the highest and most reputable information on the matter at the time, such to a point that intellectuals and scientists such as Thomas Edison regularly visited their plantations to study and learn from the Koreshians. They grew into a thriving and self-sustaining community and purchased a significant portion of the Calusa-made island of Mound Key, using it to grow more of their crops. At their peak, they had a successful bakery, a power plant, a college, many successful businesses and buildings in a territory of over 110 square miles, the fifth largest city in the United States at that time. Cyrus Teed and the Koreshians played a big part in the American expansion into southern Florida, their town even being the reason for the first rail line to southern Florida. Their community grew and thrived, but only for about a decade. Why? Well, because the core tenet of the Koreshian belief system was celibacy, to never have sex and to never reproduce. This is of note to all you potential cult leaders. Celibacy is not a way to get new followers. The success of any religion is very dependent on people being born into a belief system rather than people being recruited into a belief system. A child's mind is far more malleable than an adult's mind, and the surefire way to ensure your success is to brainwash them young. This is far easier than recruiting skeptical adults to your cause. Adults are busy. They have jobs and family and responsibilities and are presented with information and complex choices on a daily basis, unlike a child.
child. When an adult is told by a nice person that the earth is hollow and that we need to be celibate, the idea might sound cool at first, but this adult is going to go home and tell their spouse or parent what they heard, maybe to their coworker or their friend, and then perhaps be presented with new information by those friends and family that refutes those other ideas. They might be ridiculed, made fun of. They might be reminded that sex is in fact quite fun. It's hard to recruit an adult into a cult, and that's why most cults are small, and that's why most cults like the Church of Mormon disavow birth control. Because they want children born into the religion to be indoctrinated into the religion young. That is what ensures the cult's survival and growth into a legitimate religious movement. Remember, kids, all religions started as cults. So, with no children being born and with very few new adult members joining, the Koreshans never grew beyond a few hundred strong. And after a brutal fistfight at a train station, Teed died, leaving them without a leader. And the prophecies of Teed came greatly into doubt after his death, as he did not raise from the dead as he had promised and foretold to his followers that he would. You see, all Koreshans believed that you laid in rest for 3 days after dying and then were reborn as an immortal. So after Teed's death, the Koreshans wrapped his body in linen and placed it on the beach and waited there with the body for weeks, waiting for him to be risen from the dead. But after a week and a half, due to the excessive rot and stench in the hot and humid Florida weather and the very obvious risk to public health, local authorities ordered the body be buried. Teed never rose from the grave as promised, and his religious cult began to disband. Now, as the remaining few Koreshans grew older and died, so did the cult. Its last member passed away in 1981, but that member left all the land, which included their property on Mound Key, to the state of Florida, and it's all now a very impressive public park that is full of the plants the Koreshans cultivated in the area, some that no one has ever been able to successfully grow anywhere else in the U.S. since. Plus, there's an old 100-year-old tortoise living on that property who was living there during the Koreshan occupation. He's still there today. Man, the things that turtle must have seen.
But they, for a brief time, occupied this island as well. But in the end, the Calusa won out. No one lives here. No one uses this space. And their structures stand to this day. And I don't know if you noticed, we just crossed over a mound while I was talking. So now we're standing on top of the highest mound, the 30-foot high platform mound at the center of the island, which is the highest point in South Florida, actually, and it's man-made. And so I guess you're probably asking yourself, well, how do they know that people lived here 2,000 years ago? And the answer is fire pits. You can carbon date the detritus inside these deep fire pits in the island. So they date the island to 2,000 years based on the fire pits. And that's a conservative estimation. You don't have any evidence beyond that time period, so you have to say 2,000 years because that's how old the fire pits are. But they didn't make this island in a day and then burn a fire the next day. Obviously, this took a very, very long time to be here. So it could have been here as much as 1,000 years before, if not longer, because also, as we know from all these episodes and everything we've learned, any site that was used by these ancient peoples was not just used by the mound builders. These sites often were inhabited, used by people going way back 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 years or more. So, and I mean, god damn, I'm standing on 10,000 years worth of shells right now. I mean, look at this. And primitive man, that is an idea we have to completely eliminate in our brains. That is that institutional racism you hear about. That comes from way back. That comes from the 1500s. That comes from those European settlers, our ancestors, landing here and seeing people with a different color skin, a confusing sounding language, and an agrarian lifestyle, which they completely didn't understand. They had muskets and metal and buildings made of stone, what they thought was the most advanced society in the world. They came here to see dirt and wood structures, people showing their skin. Just completely went against every ideal that those idiotic, murderous Spaniards had. And that is where racism started. The key to eliminating those institutional racist concepts is to stop thinking about primitive man. There was never primitive man. The man who built this island, the human who built this island, was far more advanced than we are. They were better at science. They were better at technology. They were better at astronomy.
astronomy, because they did it all without the aid of all our fancy tools and our fancy gadgets, and they thrived. They thrived for thousands upon thousands of years. And we can see the writing on the wall, folks. We've barely made it a couple hundred, and we going down very soon. And this is just a super cool site, guys. The well-kept and well-maintained archaeological parks are very important because they offer a much more clearer picture to the novice or to the layman or the tourist what ancient sites looked like and how to insert into their consciousness ideas about primitive man and that he was not primitive at all. But it's so fun to visit these more primitive sites, as in they haven't been maintained or kept up, because the imagination just starts to burn with ideas. You're just walking these trails, the place is completely overgrown, but the hills, it's rolling hills, and every time you're walking over a mountain, you see shapes in the distance, and you're just standing on all these shells and clay that were brought here thousands of years ago. It just boggles the mind. And really, I mean, this is what they intended these places to end up like once they were gone, to go back to nature and become these silent ossuaries, these natural realms reclaimed by the earth. It's just utterly fascinating. It makes me hate myself more and more and more. So that's Mound Key, folks. And remember, we all like to be tourists, of course. It's fun, it's great. Have some fun in the sun, drink a Mai Tai on the beach. But everywhere we go, we're always standing on top of the remnants of a mighty, ancient civilization that's completely forgotten. And we need to respect what they did, how they prepared this land for us, what they built for us to have our fun on. We need to reinsert those people into our history. We need to make them part of us, and we need to live our lives with respect to them and in accordance to the guidelines they set for us.